Good afternoon. It's good to see you. I can see who's got the stamina to still be willing to attend sessions at 2:30 in the afternoon, so good on you. I appreciate you being here. My name's Rick McDowell. I'm a senior project manager with Envista in the technical solutions group. Specifically, I work in the warehouse management systems practice. So we want to talk about supply chain execution system selection overall, and particularly from my frame of reference is primarily warehouse management systems. We leverage the same methodology across all supply chain execution systems. So a little bit about Envista. As a company, we offer end-to-end supply chain consulting. So we were founded in 2002, and our current CEO is one of the two founding partners of the company. So maintaining a consistent vision across all that time. Over 1,200 customers worldwide, and our customer base ranges from the mid-market. We do a lot of work with everything from mid-market to Fortune 500 customers. So briefly, some of the projects we do in the technology solution group. So we do strategy projects. I get involved in a lot of these, and typically these begin as assessments where we're going to come in and we're going to look at a company's current state. We're going to assess where they are, look for opportunities where we believe they can move forward, gain efficiencies, and gain performance advantages. We're going to develop a future state vision in collaboration with the company. We're going to look at that future state vision, and we're going to identify where they have technology gaps that are needed to take the company to that envisioned future state. We can and typically do participate in helping companies develop a business case scenario, business case justification for those. So the logical next step is if we've identified gaps that argue for looking at supply chain execution systems, we can do the selections, which is going to be the topic of our most of our time today. So these selections can happen around WMS, LMS, TMS, or any of the various transportation systems, fleet management, vehicle routing and scheduling, et cetera. But the idea here is we want to bring expertise. If you're going to engage in a WMS or a TMS or an LMS selection, there's a lot of potholes in the road that we can help you avoid. So we'll talk more about that shortly. Implementation, I don't want to spend too much time, but the key here for implementation type projects is you've bought functionality. Leveraging that functionality is going to be key to making business and process changes that take you to that envisioned future state. So it's about leveraging and exploiting the software capabilities to realize the ROI that you made the investment for. We do a lot of post-implementation support. So this can be around integration design, it can be around training, testing, regression testing, additional configuration or enhancement, and ongoing maintenance. And then finally, we do modeling and analytics type projects. This is our TMS group does a lot of these, where they're doing network optimization, fleet right sizing, and those types of projects. So a quick look at some of our supply chain execution customers. So we work with industry leaders across retail, food and beverage, wholesale distribution, and many others. One of the things that we're very proud of is the typical customer does 4 to 5 engagements with us. We are in the business of delivering more value than the fees that you pay us, and I think that reflects in the number of customers that we have long-term relationships with. So for supply chain execution software selections, this is a huge opportunity, but like all huge opportunities, it represents risk. You're thinking about making a very significant investment, and there's a lot of choices out there in the market. And it's tough to sift through the massive amounts of information that you're going to be given when you talk to software vendors and drill down to what's going to be important for you. If there was only, and you're going to hear me, I'm going to repeat myself warning. I'm going to say this again later on the presentation, probably at least once. If there was only one best WMS for every customer, we'd all be using it. There's a lot of good solutions out in the market, but because it's a good solution doesn't mean it's the right solution for you, for how you do business, for what your customers ask from you. So first of all, we want to start with a strong methodology. We want to have a methodology that's been tested, that's been repeated, and that's been subjected to feedback loops. Our selection methodology is we're constantly making small refinements to it because we never stop learning. But we have a consistent methodology we've used for countless selections. We want to understand your requirements. And when I say understand your requirements, I don't mean superficially. We want to have a deep understanding. If we go into a software selection, we want to have a deep understanding of how you do the business that you're going to use this software for. So I'm going to speak primarily to WMS. When we develop those requirements, they need to not only be high-level functional and technical requirements, but we need to dig into your operation because WMS functionality, again, is going to vary across different solutions. So we need to understand how the work is being done. More detail on that shortly. We want to drive to a short list of vendors. So part of the key here is understanding what the vendor landscape looks like and being able to say, okay, knowing what we know about the different solutions, we can guide you towards these are who we think you should be looking at based on the size, the scale of your operations, the number of facilities you're operating, the complexity we're seeing in your operational and process design on the floor. Right? We're going to talk much more about demos in a little bit, but we need to do meaningful demos. And demos are a way of desalesifying this process and drilling down to show us you can do what we need to do to run our business, to run our operations. So again, more on demos shortly. We need to evaluate based on both quantitative and qualitative data. And we need to put this into a format where we can sift through all of this and make a meaningful, as much as possible, apples and apples comparison. And then finally, the selection and vendor negotiation, which is also something that most companies typically are not negotiating with supply chain execution vendors on a routine basis. We have lots of experience and we can provide lots of help here. So a little bit more about the methodology. It's a three-phase methodology and requirements analysis. I'm not sure I love baseline interviews because we're going to do those. So we'll do baseline interviews with primary stakeholders. Again, my side of the business, primarily WMS. We're going to understand what you've got now, how you're using it, where its shortfalls are, all of those things. And then I want to get into your DC. Because if you really want to know your pain points, and I'm a former DC manager, folks, and I know I did not have the detailed level of knowledge that my folks out on the floor did. So that's where I want to be. So we're going to take people with operational experience and an understanding of DC operations. We're going to get out on the floor and we're going to talk to the people that are performing the actual work. We're going to find out how does it go normally? What are your edge cases, your exceptions? Where are the places where it's breaking and causing you heartburn? Right? And we need to understand this at a detailed level because this is going to inform what we ask the vendors to solve. Give us functionality to solve these specific gaps for your business. Okay, those requirements that we develop through this process are going to evolve into the RFP instructions. So we're going to publish the instructions and the requirements, the detailed requirements. As soon as that RFP is in the hands of the vendors, as soon as we've safely placed it in the hands of the vendors, we're going to immediately pivot to developing demo scripts. We're going to take everything that we've learned about your company, both at a high level and at a low granular operational level, and we're going to translate those into demo scripts that are relevant to what you need. Okay. No two demos for two different customers for the same software should ever be the same, because the businesses aren't the same. So what you need to see to make an informed decision is going to be different. In the meantime, we're evaluating the RFP responses, again, across both quantitative, some things are very easy to quantify, right? We're going to evaluate based on cost. We're going to provide additional information about the quality of the RFP responses. We're going to quantitatively assess where they landed in terms of requirements, how many of them might require enhancement or customization. We'll typically offer the vendors a chance to walk through your operations for the same reason that we want to see them. We want to give them context and give them the best opportunity to understand who you are and what you need. So when they come to the demo, we can hold them accountable to show us you can do what we need a WMS to do, or a TMS or an LMS. They do the demonstrations, and again, I'm going to put a little bit more detail on how we prep for those and what they should look like shortly. But we're going to score, typically both my team and by about a 2 or 3 to 1 ratio will be the customer side team, and then a few members of my team that'll be scoring those. We're going to score the demos so that we can capture them. We're going to break that score down so we understand if there are areas that are particularly critical to you. For example, if you have relatively simple inbound operations, but there's a high level of complexity in how you pick orders and customer-specific requirements. We want to know that breakout. So in the demos, when we're assessing the scoring, we can potentially weight more heavily in the areas that we know are going to be operationally critical to you. So when we get into the selection phase, we're going to put together a total cost of ownership analysis so you understand what the true TCO for this type of investment is going to be across the vendors that are participating. One of the things that I will always do here is once we've seen the estimated services quotes, because services quotes can get very muddy. So what we'll do is we'll send an implementation RACI matrix out to the vendors and say, you gave us this estimated services number. I want you to fill out this RACI. What did you contemplate including in that service number? And we can line those up against each other and normalize those services quotes. Because what is vendor-side services to one vendor is client-side services to another potentially. And again, we want to, as much as possible, we want to give you apples-to-apples comparison. So what are some of those areas that we're going to weed out? Vendors are going to exclude things like what I consider to be true functional QA testing. They'll unit test code, but they won't test exceptions, variants, user input errors, all those things that happen in the real world. User acceptance testing, right? Facility acceptance testing, integration testing, particularly end-to-end testing. Rarely will you see heavy participation in their services quote plan. So we're going to make sure that information is available and it's transparent to you what they're including with those estimates. We'll move into vendor reference calls. These can be either calls or they can be site visits. I will tell you that we absolutely prefer site visits, but they're not always practical or possible. But wherever possible, we'd like to visit the vendors. In those vendor references, the vendor, or the customer is going to say nice things about the vendor. That's why they've been selected as a reference. But we can coach your team so that we dig past I know you guys are happy with them, that's why you agreed to be a reference here. Right? We get that. But can you tell us, into each life some rain must fall, and that's true with software too. So if you could change one thing, we could prep teams up with questions, probing questions to say, look, give us a little more than we love them and they're wonderful. Right? If you could ask them to focus on one area of development that you'd like to see some more robust functionality in, what would it be? You know, when was the last time you had contact with customers? Just an array of questions that we like to prep you up with. Big one, implementation planning. This is where that RACI comes in really handy. So now, based on what we've got, we can put together a baseline implementation plan, and we can give you a realistic expectation of what is an implementation going to look like with each one of these vendors. What resources should you plan to bring to the table or have to locate, have to find? What's covered, what's not in their services estimate? What's the timeline potentially look like? We can tell you a lot about a prospective implementation here. And then vendor negotiations. When you've selected a preferred vendor, as I said, this is not a process that typically companies go through frequently. At least we hope you don't. So we can help a lot with negotiations with the vendor, and I'll put a little more detail on that shortly. So thinking about the who and what. Right, everybody wants to know how long is this going to take. Let's talk about more about who's and what's. First of all, we need to understand what's in and what's out of scope to get an understanding. This is true of both selections, but also when we start talking about implementation, baseline implementation planning. We want to make sure that the right people are in the core team during the selection. So we need SMEs, we need key resources from IT, from operations. Right? We need to make sure we have the right people in the room during selection. A little bit about our relationship with vendors. If we're engaged in a selection, we know a lot of the vendors in the market. When we're in a selection, our relationship is with you, it's with the client, period. So I will be respectful with vendors. We will be fair to them. We will treat them with courtesy, but we will hold them to their deliverables and to their timelines. More about the who and what. We want to break these requirements out into their separate categories, all of which we need to address. Functional requirements, technical, security requirements, performance requirements. So we want to make sure that all of those are represented in the vendor RFP responses, that they're called out and that they're answered adequately. We want to be thinking not just about what you need today or the rest of 2024. A WMS, if we do this right, a WMS is supposed to be a long-term investment. This is not a process you want to be repeating in 3 years. I cannot stress enough how important it is to do this selection well. Because again, there's a lot of great WMSs in the market, but not every one is the right one for you. And you don't want to make the wrong selection. So we're going to be thinking out, you know, what do we expect you to need over the next 10 plus years in terms of functionality? Yeah, this is current state now. How can we envision it potentially changing, and how well supported is that growth, that expansion, that increase in technical difficulty that's likely to happen for your company over that 10 and 15 year period? So anywhere from 3 to 4 up to 6 is about probably the range for what we want to go into a selection with, where we can put out an RFI if we want to narrow the field a little bit. Sometimes an RFI can be helpful in helping us maybe, you know, pare down our pool of potential vendors. We need to understand where your organization stands in terms of technology and what your requirements are. Coming out of a project just real recently, not everybody needs the biggest, best, and fastest. It's a reality. So where do you land in terms of technical and functional requirements and scalability? What realistically do we need? We need to find the right answer for you. And also, you need to be aware that there are occasions where a vendor will decline to participate in an RFP. We're generally not given at least a fully transparent reason. I think sometimes it's bandwidth. I think sometimes it's they don't feel that they have that the solution is a good fit for your requirements. They typically are not going to say that, but they may internally. But for whatever reason, vendors may occasionally decline to participate. So that's not unheard of. Demos. Okay, demos are my favorite subject. So, an unscripted demo is a fancy word for a sales presentation. I have every respect for sales presentations, but that's not what we're here for at this point. So, first of all, we want to give vendors as much notice as possible of when demos are going to be conducted. We're going to give them a set of scripts that are going to be you-specific. Because again, a set of scripts that would be perfect and hit the right areas for one company are not perfect and don't hit the right areas for another company, right? So we have a template for the format, but the bottom line is we're going to develop a lot of these scripts are going to be specific to you because it's what you need, what's going to be important to you in making the selection. By making these, first of all, we'll skip over the base level functionality that we know that vendors can support. We don't want to spend a lot of time on that. We want to get into specific areas that, again, where you have requirements that may be technically more difficult, may rely on more robust functionality to be able to support. If you have, again, very specific client requirements or customer requirements, if you have a broad array of very specific things that your customers require you to do on shipments to them. Things like serialization, lot tracking, and how robust a functionality you might need around things like serialization and lot tracking. So again, you give them very specific, and my job is not make it easy on the vendors. They should be stretched for them a little bit, okay? And then we want to prep the people who are going to be scoring, because again, this is not something that most of your people do typically. They're not sitting in software demos critically evaluating individual scripts and the performance on them. So we're going to prep them up and kind of give them some guidance on tips for scoring. And things, overall tips like we really want the same scores to be present in all of the sessions, for example. It's one of those things you might not think about. But if we're demoing 3 vendors and we've got a participant who can only be in one of the demo sessions, I'm going to tactfully recommend that person not score the session that he or she can attend. Because we want to keep this, again, as level a playing field as possible. We want the scoring results to be meaningful. So we want to bring, the good thing about templates, and we have refined and refined and refined the templates we use for selections, because there's always a little improvement that we can come up with. But we've got templates that are flexible enough to work for your individual selection and standardized enough to be repeatable. And frankly, we've been able to wring them out and critique them and find things that we didn't care for and make all these changes. So we have a standard way that we're going to look at how we evaluate and summarize RFP responses, for example. How we publish and score demo scripts. And you can see there's a little difference in the templates across, for example, warehouse management system and TMS, yard management. But the methodology remains the same across these. And again, it's been a feedback loop over more years than I've been with Envista doing selections. At the end, if we do this well, what the scoring reflects is who is the best fit for your company. Doesn't mean they're the best WMS in the world. It doesn't mean they're going to score #1 on anybody's hit list. It means they meet your needs the best, and they support your growth as an organization where you want to be in future state the best, and they support those requirements that allow you to be to perform heroically for your customers the best. That's the solution we're trying to find here. Again, it's going to include both quantitative and qualitative data. So some of them are going to be numeric, and some of them are going to be things that we're going to stack up against each other and qualitatively rate one vendor against another. Really important point here. Think about functionality the vendors can deliver now. Roadmaps are wonderful. They give us an idea of what's in the company's mind in terms of where they want to go from an R&D perspective, but the bird in the hand is today's functionality that they can show us in a demo. I don't want to see it in PowerPoint. It's interesting to see that that's on your development roadmap. I want to see it, and this is critical. This is part of the coaching that we give always before demos. I want to see it in the application live. And the first thing I'm going to do, and I will ask this, and I will encourage customers to ask this during demos, if I wanted to change that, how would I change it? I love that question. We will be, again, we will be professional with the vendors, but it's not our job to make their demos easy. How would you change that configuration? What does it look like? And increasingly, you know, we're looking at being able to support our own, being able to exert greater control over our own implementations, right? To do minor configuration changes with the business. So we're going to ask them to show us those sorts of things in the demo, and we want to see it in the application. The client references are again, setting aside the assumption that they're going to give positive references. That's the expectation. That's why we're visiting them, not somebody else. At the same time, they really can, if we ask them the right questions, they can provide a lot of useful insight. Because customers in reference calls tend to be pretty honest with us. It's been my experience. So we want to consider those references, and we want to consider their responses to some of the probing questions we'll ask those references when we're doing the site calls or visits. It's surprisingly not real uncommon for, as we come down to the end, to have a preferred vendor, but for there to be two that, and I'll put it the way it was put to me on a recent selection, is we really believe that either one of these two WMSs will do what we need it to do, and we think we would be happy with either. We lean towards and prefer, at this point, this solution. So the answer is, okay, you've got two viable solutions that you would be willing to negotiate a contract with. Let's start contract negotiations with both and allow them to differentiate themselves there too. In terms of you know, advantageous pricing, in terms of service concessions, whatever it may be. We can help with those negotiations because, again, we're familiar with the process. We've done it a lot. We know the players. We know the market. The implementation team should contain, ideally, some of the selection team members, but they are separate teams, and we need to remember that. Okay. So at each phase of this process, we should be preparing for the next phase. We're thinking about, you should be thinking about implementation as you go into a selection, because some of the things we do in the selection can really help you when it comes time for implementation. So same thing with the team members. We want to seed the selection team with some people that you think would be potentially key players in the implementation core team. And don't underestimate the time it's going to take you to get to a selection decision. On a Gantt chart, it's a week. In real life, it doesn't have to be, that does not have to be the case. Okay, so understand the level of discussion and, you know, back and forth and Q&A that's going to go into getting from the time where we would present a final recommendation to the time you are ready to start negotiating with a vendor. So let's talk just a little bit about total cost of ownership. This is one of the areas that we really, it can be a little difficult, but we're going to work really hard to, again, try to normalize those numbers between vendors. There's always going to be some ambiguity here because of services. It's always going to be around services. But we'll try to remove as much of the ambiguity as possible and make the TCO picture as clear as we can. And then a whole bunch around contract negotiation. Let's talk about some of the key points of contract negotiation and definitely how we can help you here. So licensing and subscription costs are going to be, they're based differently depending on the software vendor, right? There's some commonalities, but they're not the same. So it can be based on total concurrent users, total named users, and that value during peak season. So you have the opportunity to negotiate if you have a heavy spike during a short peak season. You have the opportunity to negotiate with the vendor based on licensing to be a more normalized across the year figure. That can be transactionally based, number of LPNs processed, inbound lines, outbound lines, some combination of any or all of these. But it's easy to forget things like look at your projected user count increase over time and pre-negotiate a discount on future blocks of user licenses. So we can think about things like this. In the initial contract, what customizations or modifications and how much time is contemplated in there, right? This is a very, very common area to negotiate. You're not planning on implementing yard management or slotting immediately at go live, but within a year, you'd like to. It is not uncommon to be able to negotiate in inclusions that are incremental licensing costs, to be able to negotiate them in at the time that you're signing the WMS, the contract for WMS or TMS or whatever, for additional functionality. At a discount, or to persuade a vendor to include it if it's not a huge incremental cost. Okay? Implementation service is exactly what I talked about, what's included and what's not. Right? That way you have a clear picture of what you're expected to bring to the table in implementation and what the vendor's truly planning on doing. The expectation that service rates, the billable service rates, are going to be locked in for the duration of the contract, or of the project, I mean. Look for the annual price increases in the master solution or master services agreement. You have the opportunity sometimes to negotiate additional weeks of hypercare beyond what the vendor standard offering is, some product training, lots of other things, right? So these are all things that we can help make sure that you leverage your position in negotiations when you sit down to negotiate a contract with a vendor. Okay. So we do this if this is not done well. Okay, I pardon the terrible metaphor, but a supply chain execution software purchase is not a date, it's a marriage. It's supposed to last a long time. You do not want to realize in 2 years or 3 years that you didn't probably make the best choice that you could have made, and you've got to go back to the drawing board. And we see that, right? The consequences of not an ideal choice are huge. What does it take to do it right? You need to understand who the vendors are. It helps if you have an existing relationship with the vendors where they understand, I'll work with you, I'll be professional with you, but we act on behalf of the client, always. We'll shake hands at the end, and somebody's going to get this deal and somebody's not going to get this deal, but it's going to be the one that I think is the right one for the client. And I expect you to respect that. So we're going to approach it that way. That's the only way that we can do what we signed up for to do if we're doing the selection with you. Don't shortcut. The discovery that I talked about, I think the biggest mistake that the company can make is to try to rush this process and not permit enough time for certain things are going to take some time. Number one, if we're going out to your facilities, we need time to be able to do discovery. I want to be able to get out on the floor. I don't want a 3-hour meeting with the DC general manager and a Q&A session and walk away thinking I know how that DC operates. That's not how it works. So we want time on site to truly understand what you do and how you do it and what's unique about you and what's challenging about your operations and what are giving your people headaches. Your floor associates and your management, right? We want to be able to know that. We want to give the vendors adequate time to prepare good demos. A well-prepared demo with the right scripts that go where that show you what you need to see is hugely helpful in helping you. We're forcing the vendors to differentiate themselves, to spread the pack for you if we do a good demo. If we do a superficial demo, whoever does the best presentation wins. And that's not what we're looking for. So we need adequate time for the vendors to respond to RFPs, to prepare for demos. We need adequate time on site. If it's a multi-site, if you have multiple facilities, we may, the number of sites we've had, everybody says, we have 6 sites. How many will you guys need to visit? My answer is always, that depends. If you answer a few questions for me, how similar are they to, obviously, how similar are they to each other? What are the differences in processes, or differences in equipment, differences in layout even? Because layout drives process. Whether it should or not is another question, but it does. And so, how many of those 6 DCs in the network do we need to visit? If the answer is 1, it's a shorter timeline. If the answer is 2, it's longer. And shortcutting is just, it's just a bad place to save time. Because again, at the end, you're going to live with this decision for a very long time. So, right now we're ahead of schedule, which I'm sure you're heartbroken about, right? We would love to sit here longer. But I do want to ask you, first of all, a couple of things. First of all, I'm happy to take any questions. The second of all, look us up or look me up. I'm going to be here the rest of the day and tomorrow. We're at 7279, which is about a rock throw that away. So be very happy to talk to any of you. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, you can call them out here, or for those who don't have questions, enjoy the rest of the show. Right. Thanks, folks, for your time.